Joko Widodo assumed office as the seventh president of Indonesia on October 20, 2014, under immense public optimism. As the country's first president who came from outside the established political elite or military background, Jokowi's rise resonated with the idea that a reform-minded and people-focused administration could push Indonesia toward a new era of prosperity. When he took office, Indonesia stood as the world's fourth most populous nation and the largest economy in Southeast Asia, boasting trillions of dollars in gross domestic product, GDP. But it also faced structural issues, such as regulatory complexity, corruption, and income inequality. So, just how did the economy of Indonesia truly perform under Joko Widodo, and what were the key economic policies that were implemented? Well, let's start from the most important economic indicator used, GDP. Here's a graph on Indonesia's annual GDP growth, data from the World Bank. As you can see, from 1990 to 2023, Indonesia's annual GDP growth has relatively been stable. There were years that saw contraction, such as in 1998 and in 2020. But overall, everything was good. So, just how did Indonesia perform under Joko Widodo? Well, Joko Widodo served as the president of Indonesia from 2014 to 2024. Here, you can see that from 2014 to 2023, Indonesia's GDP was stable, except, of course, from the COVID-19 pandemic. But was this economic performance good when we compare it to previous presidents? Let's find out. From 2014 to 2023, the average annual GDP growth of Indonesia was 4.22%. Comparatively, the president that preceded Joko Widodo was Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who governed from 2004 to 2014. The economic growth rate under him saw an average annual GDP growth rate of 5.65%, which was higher by approximately 1.43 percentage points. Then, another president was Megawati Sukarno Putri, who served from 2001 to 2004, which saw an average annual GDP growth of 4.49%. So, as you can see, Joko Widodo, compared to the previous two presidents, had actually seen a lower economic growth rate on average. So, does this mean that Joko Widodo isn't actually a good economic manager? Not necessarily. The GDP growth rate is a critical indicator, but it doesn't capture the full complexity of economic governance. Several factors beyond a president's direct control influence GDP growth. We have seen severe contraction in 2020 related to the COVID-19 pandemic, which was completely out of Joko Widodo's control. Then, in 2018, we also saw the trade war between China and the United States, which affected Indonesia's economy indirectly as global supply chains were disrupted and investor sentiment in emerging markets wavered. These external challenges contributed to slower growth during Jokowi's tenure, making it difficult to draw a direct comparison with previous presidents, whose administrations did not face similar global crises of this scale. Nevertheless, from 2014 to 2019, the first tenure of Joko Widodo, the economy was still stable and growing. The average annual GDP growth for this period was higher, at 5.03%. Beyond GDP growth, another measure to understand the economic performance of Joko Widodo is inflation. Inflation happens when the general price level of goods and services in an economy rises, leading to a decrease in the purchasing power of money. It is a critical economic indicator that reflects the cost of living and the stability of an economy. Here's a graph with data that we collected from the same source. Here you can see that inflation is much more stable under Joko Widodo as compared to previous presidents. From 2014 to 2023, the average annual inflation rate was at 3.77%. Comparatively, from 2004 to 2014, which was governed by Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, The average annual inflation rate of Indonesia was 7.11%, a figure that was much higher. Megawati Sukarno Putri, who governed from 2001 to 2004, also saw higher average annual inflation rates at 9.06%. This means that inflation in Indonesia has shown a significant downward trend over the years, reflecting better economic stability and effective monetary policies under Joko Widodo's administration. But just how did Joko Widodo manage to have an economy with stable inflation rates when his predecessors saw higher ones? Well, there are a lot of reasons that can dictate why this is the case. But there are two strong reasons that we see. The first is because Joko Widodo focused on structural economic reforms and prudent fiscal management. When he assumed office in 2014, Joko Widodo implemented policies aimed at improving Indonesia's infrastructure, reducing logistical bottlenecks, and ensuring more efficient distribution of goods. What this basically meant for inflation was that prices of goods and services became more stable, as the cost of moving and producing them decreased. Better infrastructure reduced delays and inefficiencies, which had previously driven up costs for businesses and consumers alike. This focus on structural improvements helped curb inflationary pressures that often stemmed from supply chain disruptions. On top of that, Joko Widodo had also implemented prudent fiscal management. Or put simply, he managed the country's budget wisely. He cut several measures that were unnecessary, like fuel subsidies, and focused on investments that boosted productivity, such as infrastructure and agriculture. He ensured government funds were used effectively. This helped keep prices stable and inflation low. Here's a graph on the budget of central government expenditures by function, data from Statistics Indonesia. Here you can see his policies in effect. From 2011 to 2013, the years prior to Joko Widodo's entrance, the budget was spread out in various functions. But one of them would become important as Joko Widodo enters office. So, let's extend the graph and see what it looks like from 2014 to 2016. Now, you can see big changes, but one of them is no other than economic affairs. From 2015 to 2016, economic affairs spending more than doubled, health spending also tripled, and social protection skyrocketed. But look at the general public services, it fell down. Why? Well, Joko Widodo prioritized spending on areas that directly impacted economic growth and social welfare. Economic affairs, health, and social protection became the focus because they address core issues like infrastructure development, public health, and poverty alleviation. These sectors provided long-term benefits by boosting productivity, improving living standards, and reducing inequality. On the other hand, general public services, which include administrative costs and non-essential government expenses, were trimmed to free up resources for these critical areas. This shift reflects Widodo's commitment to efficient budgeting, channeling funds where they could have the most significant impact. Secondly, however, a reason for the low inflation rate under Joko Widodo is because we are comparing Joko Widodo to his predecessors. The predecessors of Joko Widodo, SBY, and Megawati Sukarno Putri governed during times of higher inflationary pressures. For instance, SBY faced significant challenges during his administration due to global economic conditions, such as the 2008 global financial crisis and volatile oil prices, which drove inflation higher. Similarly, Megawati Sukarno Putri's administration dealt with economic instability following the Asian financial crisis of 1997 to 1998. The Indonesian economy was in a recovery phase during her tenure, with high inflation driven by a weakened rupiah and efforts to stabilize the economy. The combination of these challenges resulted in inflationary pressures that were more pronounced compared to Joko Widodo's time. Thirdly, a key economic indicator is unemployment. Here's a graph with data from the same source. We don't even need to compare the average from here, as you can already tell just how low and stable unemployment was during Joko Widodo's tenure, and how volatile it was from previous years. But again, as we just mentioned, this is because of the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which you can already tell from the graph. The unemployment rate of Indonesia started to go up in the late 1990s. Then it was exacerbated by challenges during the 2008 global financial crisis, which you can see that the peak of the unemployment rate was on 2007 at 8.1%. Joko Widodo's tenure enjoyed relatively better economic conditions compared to those turbulent times. By the time Joko Widodo took office in 2014, Indonesia had already experienced years of gradual economic recovery and stabilization under his predecessors. This foundation allowed his administration to implement policies that further reduced unemployment and maintained stability in the labor market. But during COVID-19, however, it is amazing to see that Indonesia's unemployment was stable. It went up indeed, but it wasn't as bad and high as those seen in previous years. Lastly, the biggest factor behind Joko Widodo is no other than foreign direct investments, FDI. FDI was one of the key initiatives of Joko Widodo. He led many reforms, such as simplifying business licensing processes, reducing bureaucratic red tape, and improving the ease of doing business in Indonesia. Here, you can already tell from the graph just how well Indonesia's FDI was as compared to the previous years. From 2014 to 2023, it was extraordinarily high. But of course, it was also rising as seen in the years from 2010 to 2013, just before Joko Widodo came into office. Now, let's talk about the economic policies Joko Widodo implemented. Jokowi's signature legacy is arguably the vast network of infrastructure projects rolled out across the archipelago. From toll roads to seaports, these projects aim to lower logistics costs, foster connectivity, and broaden economic opportunities beyond Java. Beyond infrastructure projects, he has also overseen the Omnibus Law on Job Creation, which was passed in 2020. The Omnibus Law on Job Creation, or simply the Job Creation Law, sought to overhaul numerous regulations simultaneously. Thirdly, there's also the famous new capital city, Nusantara. In 2019, Jokowi unveiled plans to move Indonesia's capital from Jakarta to a newly planned city in East Kalimantan, on the island of Borneo, called Nusantara. This is a long-term vision planning that aims to position the new capital city as a hub for innovation, green energy, and sustainable planning. But possibly some of the boldest and most significant economic policies implemented under Joko Widodo is when he banned the export of raw minerals, particularly nickel, in 2020. This policy was a game-changer for Indonesia's economy and marked a shift towards resource-based industrialization. By banning the export of unprocessed minerals, Joko Widodo's administration aimed to encourage the development of downstream industries, such as smelting and refining within Indonesia. This policy was designed to capture more value from the country's abundant natural resources and reduce its reliance on exporting raw materials. The nickel export ban, in particular, had a profound impact on Indonesia's economy. As the world's largest producer of nickel, Indonesia held a critical position in the global supply chain, especially for industries like stainless steel manufacturing and electric vehicle (EV) battery production. By restricting exports, the government incentivized foreign companies to invest in domestic smelting and battery production facilities. Major global players, including Tesla and Chinese firms like KTL, began exploring and committing to projects in Indonesia, transforming the country into a key player in the EV supply chain. Indonesia's economy under Joko Widodo was indeed stable, and was once that championed infrastructure development, regulatory overhauls, and social assistance programs that helped Indonesia maintain growth at around 5% prior to the pandemic. But at the same time, Joko Widodo had, of course, also seen challenges. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.